Hello, and welcome to today's session of Ask Nurse Linda. Today we have a guest who's was just chatting with, so this is going to be a very exciting program. I can tell you right off front. Our guest today is an award-winning director and future television showrunner. He and his partner of 20 years run the leading study into disability representation on television. How important is that? So we need to talk more about that. Don received their BFA in motion picture production from Wright State University, where they learned from Oscar-winning filmmakers. They started their career as a child actor, singer, and public figure in their hometown of Toledo, Ohio. So welcome today, Dom Evans.
Hello, welcome to me. Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am in my early 40s. I'm from the Midwest. I'm a creative individual. I am a physically disabled, neurodivergent, trans non-binary filmmaker, director, showrunner, consultant, activist. I have a lot of hats. I have had a really long career in studying representation, understanding representation. I've done work in marriage equality, on healthcare. I do a lot of work into sex and sexuality in terms of intersection with disability as a trans and queer disabled person. And I just do a lot of work that I hope makes the world a little better.
Well, we thank you for your efforts in that because, it's an ongoing process. We're all working on those things, but it sounds like you've really taken the situation in hand. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you got into your advocacy work?
Yeah, so I started out as a child actor, and I was a poster child for an organization, and that gave me a lot of experience in terms of like public exposure, talking about being a disabled child. But I didn't always have the right idea of or understanding about what advocacy is until I got to college and really met other disabled people that were involved in activism. And I really kind of see a difference between activism and advocacy, where I feel like activism is a bit more on the front lines, where advocacy is more of like an overall movement. So I really wanted to get involved in activism because college really lit a fire into me. I was a abused child, and I was starting to live on my own. I was separating myself from my abusive family, and I really just didn't want other disabled people to go through what I had been through, because I had all these experiences that were just horribly ableist, misogynistic, homophobic, just really horrible things that I really didn't want anybody else to go through. So that really spurred my activism, is really, this next generation deserves better.
Well, that is a lot to go through. I'm sorry you had to go through all of that. I'm glad you came out on the other end, because not everybody does. And so I'm glad that you did, and that you're able to continue to carry on this work, because as you say, it's really difficult to be able to transcend some of those incidences where you've been told, especially as a young child, you don't have oftentimes young children don't have the ability to differentiate between people telling them what's right and what's wrong. The adult person tells you this is the way you're supposed to behave, so this is the way you behave, because that's the way you listen to those people in authority. So for children, it's really hard to come out of some of those experiences. So was there anything in particular that you did? Was there any moment in your life when you kind of flipped the switch and said, no, I'm in charge and this other person is not in charge? Or can you talk
Yeah.
a bit, and how did that evolve for you?
So when I was in college the first time, so I initially studied theater. I thought I wanted to be an actor. And then I was going to school and I got injured and had to quit. And that's when I reevaluated, maybe I want to be behind the scenes and creating the stories. But before that happened, I started dating my current partner. And she was a young teen mom. And so she was a few years older than me. So at that time, our son was about 7 or 8 years old. And um, I took on the task of being his parent. That was something I took on. But my family was cruel. My son is autistic and he has bipolar. And they started telling lies like he couldn't be taken out in public because I would ask them, can we have, a meal at home? Because he was particular about food. So he wouldn't eat at certain restaurants. And I said, well, we can all get food at home and everybody's accommodated. But that was seen as, well, he can't go out in public. And it was, no, we're making a deliberate accessibility choice. Well, they started yelling or yelling. They started lying about him. And that was really when I really couldn't handle it. I said, this is a child. You can do whatever you did to me. I mean, it's not right what you've done to me, but I'm an adult. I can handle this now. He's a little boy. So I gave my mother an ultimatum. I said to her, you can either treat him and my girlfriend like human beings, or, I'm not a part of your life. And she chose to make me not a part of her life. And that was around 2006. And we haven't been in each other's life since then. But that was really me finally setting a ground rule and saying, nope, this is a boundary. And you're going to have to, and I don't think it was a unfair ask. Be kind enough to treat him like a human being. You don't even have to like my girlfriend, you don't even have to like my son, but treat them like they're human. And she wasn't doing that. And so that was really a big moment for me, because for so long I had kind of said, well, it felt almost like an unhealthy attachment, to where I felt like I had to tell her everything I was doing. I was 3 hours away and I was calling her every day. I was filling her in on everything. And it was like, no, you have to really take a stand for yourself, because you are an adult. And you do want your family in your life, but if they're going to make you miserable, is that fair to you or everybody else you're with? And I think it was the best decision for me. I would do it again, but it hurts my heart that my son had to go through it. And being autistic, he doesn't forget it. He's a young adult now, and he's still, if anybody ever brings up my family, the first thing he thinks is, they didn't want me. They hated me, and that's a very heavy burden put on a child. So, but my protectiveness for him, it goes back to the next generation deserves better. So, and I put my foot down and I said, that's what happens to my son. And I've been that way ever since. And I've been the better for it, I think.
Well, I realize that is tough decisions and tough situation, but it sounds like you were able to rise above it and protect yourself and protect your son and protect your family. And so, sometimes things work out in different ways, not the way what we ever imagine, or the way that we've been raised, that, everybody grows up and, walks with this happy family, and it just not always is the case. So sometimes you have to take drastic actions, but I'm glad that you have done that and made it right for you. So sometimes I tell people, you make a decision, and that, that's your decision, that's fine. but you also have to make that decision right for you, and you've done that. So that's a good outcome.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. So describe more about your advocacy work. You've advocated obviously for yourself and for your family. Can you
Yeah.
just more about your advocacy work out in the world and in the community, locally and broader?
Yeah, so I've done both LGBT and disability advocacy. We've done like in-person protests, fighting for LGBT rights. We actually did rallies back when they were doing marriage equality rallies. I would go and talk about how disability marriage equality is a thing, how, I've been with my girlfriend, and I say girlfriend specifically. I try not to call her my partner because I want people to know I can't marry her. I will lose my home care. We've been together 20 years and we can't get married. So I would go to LGBT rallies and I would say, don't forget about disabled people, because, some of us who are gay or trans or whatever will be able to marry if we're, if LGBT marriage happens, but if we're also disabled, no, some of us won't. And that's still a fight for marriage equality. So I've been kind of one of the leading voices in the movement for marriage equality for disabled people. There are a series of programs that disabled people need to survive, like home and community-based services, or sometimes SSI, sometimes Medicaid. Things like food stamps can be impacted, and housing programs. And you basically end up having to make what I consider not an actual choice between marriage and those programs. So that's why I call it marriage equality. People will fight with me because they say, well, there's not a law. But I'm like, if it's not a fair choice, then it's not a choice at all. So then it's an issue of equality. Because there's also one thing, there was a recent presidential candidate, and I was a part of a group of disabled people who wrote legislation for them for disability. Like, they were disability proposals, and had they been elected, they would have said day one, they would have looked at all these proposals from marginalized communities and, said, can I enact this? Can I enact that? Well, one of the things I wrote was about marriage equality. And when I was crafting that legislative brief, what I found was Justice Kennedy said that marriage was an inalienable right that all human beings are entitled to. And I said, so if we're all entitled to it, but we don't have a choice in being allowed to have it, then that's an issue of equality. So we need to fight for marriage equality. So that's really been a hallmark of some of the work I've done, is educating people about that. I've been not as heavily as I wanted, but I have been trying to make people aware of the fact that planes are supposed to become accessible to wheelchairs, that you should be able to sit in your wheelchair on a plane, because some of us cannot transfer, and therefore, we're trapped in our countries. I can't travel by plane because I can't transfer. So that's been part of my advocacy work. Representation, though, has been the heart of it. I started by going to film school. When I went to film school, I knew that representation was a problem. I had no idea how bad it was. We were the only group not mentioned about that was marginalized. We talked about poverty being represented. We talked about the LGBT community. We talked about race. We talked about religious marginalized representation, but disabled people were not talked about anywhere. And the intersection of disability with all of these other communities was just ignored in all of the sections about them. So I started doing independent studies with an advisor, where I would make my own classes that involved representation and disability. And I kind of became aware of what were the issues, why were they issues, how do they relate to disabled people today. And it was so eye-opening and so pertinent to my career that I could have had as an actor, and that I would have as a director, that I decided that, this was going to be my pursuit. I was going to pursue making media. And if they weren't going to let me make it, because that was what was happening, even in film school, I wasn't included. My peers would not ever want to work with me. I'm the only person in the history of my college program who did their senior project without their classmates. I did it with super seniors who were willing to work with me, which made my project better because the super seniors had already done their junior project. So I actually got a better project because they wouldn't work with me. But it's really telling that I was the only like physically disabled person there, and they were like, it was like almost sabotage, like, we won't help you and maybe you'll get kicked out. So then there'll be another space for us. So like that just really kind of made me think this advocacy is just so important if I want to make it even in my work. But also, I don't think we realized what a big impact the media has on how we treat disabled people. And I look at all of the mistreatment I've had, and nobody should ever go through the amount of mistreatment I've had. I'm in a book called American Hate, Survivors Speak Back, about an incident in high school where they put dead mice in the elevator I used. Yeah, so I have been in, and some people consider that a hate crime. And, like, I've just been victimized by people, and I'm a survivor of things over and over and over. And if this happens to me and I'm like so gregarious, what about all the disabled people who can't speak up for themselves? So I began to see these connections between, well, we're showing physically disabled people like this, and so this is how I'm treated, and we look to the media to understand disability representation. So all of that advocacy started when I got involved in social media, to where I was talking about, this is a horrible representation, that is a horrible representation. We ended up having an international protest with, I coordinated with people from the UK and Australia, and we protested the film Me Before You and the message of better dead than disabled, which is a really common theme, that it's better to kill us than let us just live our lives as disabled people, which we know is not true for many of us. Many of us want to live. We want to have access to the world. We want to have relationships. We want to have families and jobs and all of these things, but the media tells us, and we end up seeing disabled people actually taking their own lives when these movies come out, that it's better to be dead than live any life as a disabled person. So that was a really big moment of activism, and that all spurned out of Film Dis, which was a hashtag. It started as a hashtag, and now it's a movement and a group.
So tell us how we would get into that group. Could you repeat that hashtag? Because I think our listeners maybe would like to belong to that, or at least follow it.
Well, so on any social media, you can look up hashtag Film Dis and see people talking about disability and media. And there are also people doing media, like there are groups that hang out that are disabled and watch TV together. And they've taken the hashtag and they've made it a hashtag about media where we talk about disability. I used to run weekly Twitter discussions under that hashtag, and that's how it started. Was that. Well, now Film Dis is a group, and it's a group of two people, so it's me and my girlfriend. But it's because we're not like an official nonprofit. We just call ourselves a group. But we are a consulting group. We do our media monitoring, where we release a study into disability representation annually. Our last study was actually called the pandemic years. We spent the 2 years where we were primarily in quarantine, figuring out how did that impact television and disability in television in particular. So we've turned this hashtag into research, data, statistics. We know everything you could think to know about disability on television. And Ashton and I watch 250 shows a year ourselves.
Wow.
Yeah. And we break down all that representation by race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, type of part. So, like, are they a lead character, a bit character, a supporting character? We even count extras. We are the only group that knows about extras when it comes to disability. We're the only group that we know of that counts bit characters. Most of the other research only counts lead or sometimes supporting or guest star characters. We break it down by nationality and whether the actors themselves are disabled or not, or whether we know if they're disabled or not.
So I noticed that on TV, and well, I haven't been to the movies in a long time because of the pandemic. So, right, that changed the way all of us operated. But how do you find in media representation online, on TV, in film? How do you find the reputation? Because every once in a while, I'll see somebody in a wheelchair. It'll be incorrect for the part that they're portraying. But, I'll see different things and I'll think, oh, you're not, no, that's not you don't have the right equipment, or you don't have this, you don't have that. But that's always been in healthcare.
Yeah.
In the film, because somebody's shown in the hospital, they have to have the side rail down so that you can see the actor's face better.
Oh yeah. But then
know,
I once had a side rail down and I had been on morphine, which makes me irrationally angry. I was a child and I screamed at a nurse because I found out she left the side rail down, and I was like, I could have fallen out and died. And I basically was a really, really over dramatic child because I was, medicated. But like, that's a really scary thing. They do not leave your side rails down. It is seen as like, especially for somebody with SMA, who, if I managed to roll, could really have hurt myself. So
would you say there's been any improvement? Now, very rarely, and it's very rarely, I'll see somebody on a TV show and they're in a wheelchair and there's not really any explanation. They're just going about doing their job. They're usually working in the lab as opposed to out in the field. But, they're just going about doing their job and they just happen to be in a chair, or they just happen to use a cane, or they just happen to have some kind of assistive device. And there's no explanation. And I like that because they're just a part of the show community.
Yeah, that is few and far between. I would say that no, it's not getting better. What I would say is that Hollywood's playing a game with us and they celebrate every little bit of representation. But I would say that's all pomp and circumstance. The numbers do not show that. The numbers show that it's abysmal, that only certain disabilities get represented over and over. We have done 3 studies now, so we have 3 papers worth of data. And what we have found is that, excuse me for a minute. Oh, okay. What we found is that actually the same communities get represented over and over. The same communities don't get represented over and over. So, and I think if I tell you what those communities are, you'll say, oh yeah, that's true. So the 5 disabled communities represented the most, and this was the same through all 3 studies. And these were different 250 shows every year. Like, this is not like the same data. We're just blown away that this research shows like this. So the 5 most represented are addiction, chronic disabilities. But again, like chronic, there's so many different chronic disabilities that like it's just impossible to not see that it couldn't be, more represented. Neurodivergent, and that includes mental health. So mental health plus autistic people plus ADHD altogether, multiple, and cancer. Cancer is a big one. And those five, they change order of where they are in the top five, but they have remained the top five throughout all three studies. The bottom five have also stayed the same, and they've also changed places. And the reason they change places is I'll tell you what they are, and then I'll explain why they change places a little bit in the bottom five. The top one is blind, low vision. The most of the least is there were more blind, low vision of our last study. Deaf and hard of hearing was next. Learning was third. Dwarfism was fourth, and the least represented disability, with only 4 characters out of 1,342 characters we found in our last study, was intellectual disability. The reason why those move around is the year that a show that had a deaf showrunner, Shoshana Stern, when that show was canceled, our deaf representation dropped. So it's no longer the best of the worst. It is the second best of the worst, and blind people are now showing up more. And that's because we've seen more blind shows on TV. So we see these trends. So I think we might see a boost next year in deaf rep because we've had like Marvel's Echo. Because Marvel's Echoes come out, TV is going to say, well, we're going to have a few more deaf people that year. So basically what they do is they shuffle representation. They say, we're going to, instead of adding more deaf people, we're going to take from the blind people and give deaf characters from that. And that also happens with disability and race. What we see is that white disabled characters we have more of them. But for Black and brown disabled characters, they shuffle their representation. So we may have more Black characters, but that means Latina characters may have less numbers, or Latina characters may replace the number of Asian characters. That also follows the trend of what's on television. When Crazy Rich Asians came out, our numbers exploded with Asian disabled characters. Then when more Marvel heroes were Latina, we saw that number shift towards Latina disabled characters, but they never take from white disabled characters. And that's the problem. White disabled characters keep growing in number, but non-white disabled characters keep shuffling their representation, so they have to share the same representation.
That's so interesting because I just see so few, but I don't watch the number of programs that you watch, I can tell you, but I just see so few. And when you see one, it's because of my work, I notice I would like to, just if they were just a character and just another character, and you think about the character, you don't think about the disability. But doing what I do, I notice, because that's what I do is so I'm always looking at how realistic it is and what's going on, and all those kinds of things. So it certainly is not, there's not representation in the media. We certainly know that. So how can individuals at home, how can they advocate for themselves? Is there things that people can do in their home that they would like to see more characters that look like them? I see a lot of commercials on TV where people will say, well, I grew up in a time where I didn't see any characters that looked like me, referring to their race. And now I'll see different characters, and they'll be on a commercial or an ad or something, and they'll be commenting about how if people see me, then they'll see, children of the future will say, well, maybe I can do that too, because I finally see somebody who looks like me. So Is there something that people can do? Is there, can they, I don't know, write to people? What can people do to try to get more representation into something
First,
they would like to see?
social media is a powerful force for disabled people, and it's a powerful way we can connect with networks. The biggest problem I see is that disabled people are accepting the media. And I know that when we don't have representation, we cling to what little things that, oh, well, this person was, a singer and I like singing. So that's what I have in common. And then, but like everything else is wrong and it's harmful or whatever. But like people get stuck being caught in this. And I say to you, that is telling the studios they don't have to do better. So accepting the media, we can both say, hey, I find this aspect relatable, but this media is actually helping me or hurting me in my community. Talk to the networks, tell them you don't accept non-disabled people playing us because they never get it right. They don't have the nuance. They don't understand. They can't go to the creator and say this is wrong because they don't know what's right because they don't live that life.
Right.
So it's impossible for non-disabled people to understand disability. And also I ask people all the time, how does one act disabled? What makes you disabled? You know what I mean? And they can never tell me. I've asked a million actors this question. When I have actors come to me and argue and say, Dom, why can't I play a disabled character? I say, well, what would you do to be disabled? They don't have any answers because the only answer is physically stereotyping, vocally stereotyping. That's all they can do is stereotype us. And stereotypes don't help anybody. They may be embedded a bit in reality. We know stereotypes are based on reality, but they're often exaggerations. And the reason why stereotype portrayals can be can seem relatable is because they're somewhat embedded in reality, but they cause so much harm that I don't think disabled people are connecting. Well, the harm I'm feeling in my life is connected to how I'm being portrayed. They just see I'm not represented and I'm desperate for some connection. So I think the starting point is we need to stop accepting these portrayals. We need to demand better. We deserve stories about us. We deserve stories where we're the lead character. We deserve stories where our disability is not the focal point. And I don't think we should ignore disability. Some stories we may not have to talk about disability at all, but our disabilities are there. They do impact us. And that's been a hallmark of our writing work, is finding ways to include disabled people that are like seamlessly authentic. How can you exist in this world and just be a disabled person, and you can't exist really without ableism because it's there. So you have to acknowledge that if that's the type of story you're telling. You may have a story that has nothing to do with disability and nobody's characteristics or anything are mentioned. So disability is never mentioned. You just see the wheelchair or you see the cane or you happen to know they're disabled in some other way without ever being told that. That's good. And I think there's a lot of people that want that, but I also think we need those experiences where I'm trying to think about this this woman that ran a studio that I consulted for in Hollywood. We had a discussion and she talked to me about how marginalized representation should be, I'm trying to think of the word, like intentional. It should be intentional. You intentionally make them disabled because that disabled person needs to be included. They need to be represented. You know what I mean? It's an intentional choice of having someone disabled play that role. And I think we need more intentional casting opportunities. That's another big factor. people don't realize that disabled people are often only allowed to audition for quote unquote disabled roles. But why can't you say, well, I need a daughter? I was a daughter before I came out as trans. I was a daughter. I could have played that role back then, you know. What about a teacher? I know multiple disabled teachers. I know disabled nurses, you know, I know disabled actors and actresses. They could play anything, you know, but Hollywood is so unimaginative. So they say, okay, we want a daughter. We're gonna just go default and we're gonna have, you know, the most basic daughter ever. We're not gonna worry about asking disabled people to come because all they see us as is disabled. So all we get cast as disabled.
But I think your point of the power of writing to the networks is really important, because sometimes it only takes one letter to change somebody's mind. And I know a lot of times people will write in about different things, and it'll just be a small number of people, but yet somehow some letter will click with somebody and it's noticed. So I think that when you put things out on the internet using social media, or you write to those network people, it really does make a difference. And you think, oh, how could one little person, you know, sitting here in my house, you know, I can't do anything. Yes, you can. You certainly can. So I think that is a really, really valued point. Now, I want to go back to something you said earlier, and it was about advocating for yourself. And I know we have a lot of questions from listeners and readers all the time about, and this week we have a lot of questions too about the funding, the extra funding for the COVID, you know, during the COVID pandemic, people got a little extra funding.
Yeah.
And that's all going away now. And so people have to go back to their funding. Well, you know, that was marginal at best. It wasn't like anybody's getting rich, you know. And so now they had this little bump in their funding because of COVID, but now they have to go back to, you know, their old style of living. So, you know, that little bump was not that much, but it made a difference in a lot of people's lives. So between that and people just trying to find help, people to come in and help them, they need a little bit of help. Insurance doesn't often pay, Medicaid doesn't often pay. You know, how can you get people to come in and help? What resources do you know about that people could possibly get to have people to come in, just, you know, like to help with a shower or...
Well, I'm on home and community-based services, and right now we're in crisis. There's a crisis of caregivers. And I think that it really is dependent on your state. I live in a state where I thank you, Governor Whitmer, because she signed something that says my home care workers all keep their $2 bonus now. The $2 pandemic pay is now their permanent pay. They have increased the you know, and they said, you know, that's still not, you know, good enough. She wants to do more, but I think that you really have to start with reaching out to who's in charge, reaching out to your government, because unfortunately there are not a lot of programs, there are not a lot of resources. We are dependent on the government, a lot of us, and that's my story too. You know, even as I find success, it comes with a you know, I'm still dependent on the government for my home care. You know, I could still end up in a nursing home. That is still a reality for me, and my whole life has been about working not only to make the world better, but to protect myself so I don't end up in a nursing home, so I have the care I need. So this is a very real thing for me, and I'm sorry for all of you going through this, because I know this firsthand. It's terrifying. It's a scary time right now. We don't have resources, but we need to turn to each other as a disabled community and start some fires. We need to get Congress, you know, solidifying this legislatively. We need to work on finding, you know, getting them to make sure that they can't cut home care. It's hard for me to also recommend resources because every single state offers a different program. And even in my state, it's different between, I lived in Genesee County 10 years ago. Now I live in Oakland County. They pay, there's like a couple dollar different pay rate even between what you get paid for the services. So you're not even working on the same program in some of these states amongst like counties. So I always say that if we are going to have universal health care, they need to have a plan in line, because they're going to be combining so many healthcare plans into one that disabled people will fall through the cracks. But like, I don't really know what resources other than we got to burn Congress down, basically. You know, we got to light some fire under their butts and have them get this legislatively handled, because we're beyond the roof's on fire. We need the water now, and Congress is the only one who can give us that. So
Absolutely. And I see what comment just came in about spouses should be paid caregivers,
they
which
should.
would be wonderful. And I see advertised on TV every once in a while. I'll see a company where you can have a family member be a paid caregiver, and I don't know about those companies. I don't really know anybody who's used those companies, but that might be a possibility as well. But I think that you've enlightened us about your state, and having your governor in your state is Ohio, right?
No, Michigan.
Michigan,
Yeah.
sorry. So,
It's okay. I'm from Ohio, so it's a little confusing. So
okay, and we talked about Ohio earlier, and then I thought, wait a minute, what, you know, it was hard, it's hard for me to pull all that politics stuff together in my head. But so Michigan has done this, so use that right to your representative and say, you know, as done in Michigan, and, you know, point out
tell
those.
them they need more pay. Tell them, you know, Governor Whitmer has given the pandemic pay. You know, my caregivers get $2 extra. That $2 makes all the difference, you know.
It makes a huge
Yeah,
difference.
yeah. And also, speaking of Ohio, that's a great example. So I lived in Ohio for 30 years. I know their home care program really well. I'm so glad I'm not there now. They're not paying their home care workers at all, or they weren't as of a month ago. I don't know if they finally rectified it, but this happened before when Ohio switched to managed care called My Care Ohio, and all these disabled people got basically what I said would happen if we combined everything into universal health care. They combined it into one program, and they didn't account for disabled people, and a bunch of people died. Now, yeah, I know there were confirmed deaths by agencies there, and nobody will talk about it. We were basically that we tried to reach out to the press. They wouldn't report on it. We were basically, it was silence. We were met with silence. And this was like, I would say 7 or 8 years ago when they switched. Around 2015, they switched to My Care Ohio. Well, now this is happening again. That was a 6-month to 1 year process where home care workers were not paid at all. And then they had to quit because a lot of them were underpaid anyway. So they had to get new jobs. And so they were leaving people with no care. They didn't have a choice. They were starving. You know, it wasn't the home care workers' fault. It was the government not paying them. My worker didn't go paid for 6 months. And my worker is actually my roommate, and they were basically really starving throughout the whole process. And it was really horrible. It was a horrible experience to watch, you know, the caregivers. And if they had not been my roommate, I would have had to find a new worker. The only reason why they stayed on was, well, they lived with me anyway, so they were just able to do my care. But lots of people lost their workers, and some people ended up in nursing homes. Well, then I don't even know what's going on, but that's happening in Ohio right now again. People are not being paid. They are not getting home care. People are dying. Nobody's talking about it. So just even between a state right next to one another, how vastly different. I would never want to be in Ohio again. Just what they've done to the home care programs is just abysmal. They didn't even want to let me initially on home care because they let a gynecologist say that I was not, because I'm trans. I experienced transphobia by the head of the home care department. They got a gynecologist to rule that while I was eligible in need, I didn't qualify for other reasons, including something involving my gender. I was like, what does that have to do with home care? I actually had to fight with a lawyer to get on the program when I moved back to Ohio, because of that. Because they had a gynecologist say that I wasn't eligible. So like it's hard to just say, like, for the US overall, you should do this, because every single state just does it so either so bad or just kind of bad.
So a good thing is to contact your state representatives, contact your national representatives, your politicians, and just keep firing away, sending them letters, telling them what's going on, that
Yeah.
they won't know unless you tell them. And so you have to keep on top of it. And, if necessary, invite the news channels in when they do that investigative reporting and say,
Yeah.
what's going on? My attendant has not been paid for 6 months. It's a government program and here I am, and let them come in and see. So there's lots of things you can do. You are more powerful as an individual than you know. And Dom, you certainly represent that, and we appreciate having you on today. Thank you so much, because this has opened a whole discussion that's just been fabulous. So I appreciate your coming on today, and I hope that you'll come back again someday, because I've
Yes, absolutely.
a lot more things to talk about. So with that, I'll sign off with you. And I'm going to go ahead and answer some questions. You're welcome to stay on if you'd like, but I'm going to blab for a while because some people have some different kinds of questions. So thanks again, Dom.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Oh, you too. Thank you. I've got a question here from a gentleman who's been a T8 para since 1999. And he's neglected to do his exercises for his hip flexors. And as you know, when you're sitting in the wheelchair, your hips are flexed at all times. You lay down in the bed, you might lay on your back for a while until you're turned, when your hips get flexed again while you're laying on your side. So some people will do prone lying to help straighten out their hips, but you can't do that when you've got those contractures in your hips. So he's worried that, is that always going to be that way, or can they be fixed? And yes, they can be fixed. And that's the important message here, is it is not an easy accomplishment, but yes, it can be done. So talk to your healthcare professional about, can they go ahead and start doing some range of motion? You might have to go to the therapist where they do the range that you have and then push a little further each time. They might give you some kind of a splint to wear that gradually will extend your hips. Of course, when you're doing this, you'll have to be out of your chair so that your hips can be straight. They might go ahead and do, if there's some contractures, they might be able to do some Botox injections to help loosen up those hips. If it's really bad, they can do some surgery. Now, they will never cut the muscle, but they might feather it a little bit to help stretch out that muscle. So you want to start with the simplest first and start doing some exercises, finding out some exercises, and over some time you should be able to unfreeze those muscles. So start with that, and then let your healthcare provider direct you. Maybe you need some more intensive treatment, like some injections or maybe even some surgery. But yes, it's possible. You will not lose your hips. And so be sure and do that. There's somebody wrote in, their legs are very stiff. Any advice on how to relax them? Well, usually that's due to tone or spasticity. So the first thing is to move your legs. Even though you're not able to move your joints using your brain to say knee, move, or whatnot. Somebody needs to do that for you, or you need to do that to yourself a couple of times a day at a minimum to exercise all your joints to keep them supple. Now, if they're really stiff, again, you might take some oral medication that goes throughout your whole body. Some people don't like the effects of that in their brain. So more prominent now is to have these Botox injections. So there's a question here on anything on Elon Musk stim units. I just, this Elon Musk just fascinates me. Now, politics aside, I don't get into that. It's just, he's got his hand in everything, doesn't he? Such an innovator. I would like to just sit down and just listen to him talk, because his mind must be going so fast at all times. So anyway, he's got this company, and they just got approval this week where he's got some chips for implants in the brain. And the goal is to help if you have a neurological problem. For instance, if you're blind, it might help restore some sight. If you're hard of hearing, it might help restore some hearing. If you're paralyzed, it might help restore some function. Now, right now, we're in this huge plethora of all of these electrical stimulation on the outside of the body, implants. When we do the professional webinar, we've always got somebody with a new innovation that's out. And the next one actually in July 12th, we're going to talk with Dr. Susan Grove from the National Rehabilitation Hospital in DC about urinary tract function. But after that, we have Raymond Anders, who's going to be talking in September 13th about a minimally invasive implant to help people breathe that can help them get off, or at least reduce the time on the ventilator. So there's all this electrical stimulation that's just blossoming right now. There are people that the Spinex company has their product coming out the first of next. Well, they have a pediatric spine stimulator that's worn on the skin, no surgery, just worn on the skin. The pediatric one's coming out, and then shortly after, the adult one will be coming out, and that's for public consumption, not experimental. That they're just about complete with all their FDA regulations and all that sort of thing. That's the Spinex company is doing that. Another company called Onward has an adult skin surface stimulation. What they're finding with these skin surface, you put some electrodes over the spinal column on your skin, so on the outside of your body, and it stimulates movement. Now, it's not like before you became paralyzed, or if you have paralysis from a disease. It's not like poof, you're all, it's all gone away. It's improvements in what function that you have. So for some people, if they have problems with hand function, they might be able to feed themselves. For some people, they might be able to do some standing or stepping, or they might have bowel, bladder, and sexual function control. So instead of catheterizing, they know when they have to void, or the bowel program, instead of taking a tremendously long time, they might realize that they need to have a bowel movement, and then they can go do what they need to do, either spontaneously or with using a bowel program that's infinitely shorter time. So all these things, it'll be different responses from everybody. What the full outcome will be for any one individual is yet to be seen. But these are all products that are coming out. Cleveland, the FES Center in Cleveland, has an implantable device. It's modular, so if you need arm function, they implant some electronic stimulator for arm function. If you also want leg function, they have an implant, and it all works together and coordinates together. Bowel and bladder function, that's another stimulator. So they coordinate it to your particular needs. That's already on the market. Down at Baylor, they're doing a vagal nerve stimulation that's getting a lot of response with upper extremity function. That should also help gastric kind of issues. So there's a lot that's going on right now, and it seems like we have somebody with a stimulator on that show because they're all coming out right now. Now, somebody also wrote in about stem cells and how's that what's the deal on that? You know, that was a huge deal in the 1990s. Now that got all caught up in political intrigue and misunderstanding and all this kind of stuff. But there's a lot of progress that's been made in the stem cell arena. It's still not quite ready for prime time, so it's not quite ready for use, but it's rapidly progressing. And probably the answer for I'm going to say cure will be a combination of all these things, therapies, maybe oral medications. There's a lot of oral medications that are coming out that are helping nerves regenerate. There's different things that is going on in the ALS and the Parkinson's community with developments of these nerve stimulating agents that will be translatable into those with paralysis from other issues. So what is good for one is good for all as far as the research that's being done. And I know that some people are keenly interested, and I can talk about some of these stimulators or nerve regenerating medications or stem cells, and people are like, there's some people who are like, sign me up right now. I want this right this instant. Well, it's not quite ready yet. The stimulators are coming out, but you know, it's not quite ready. And then there are other people that are like, there's nothing wrong with me. Why do I need to be fixed? And I totally agree with that. You need to be happy with what you are. You need to be who you are. If you want to be involved in some of these new technologies that's coming out, great. If you don't want to be involved with them, that's great too. Just be happy within yourself and do what's right for you. So it's not like I'm pushing these things. I only want to put out information so that you are aware and you will make your own decision about what's right for you. So that's the important thing to remember. There's a question about, so Elon Musk nerve stimulators. That's what got me off on that tangent. So Elon's got these, thinking about these stimulators. They're just going to clinical trials now. So this is very new. They're brain implants, not on the spine, but they can affect paralysis that occurs in the spine. So we'll have to see how it all turns out. But part of his project also is that if you don't have any neurological issues, you could also get one of these implants so that you like have super abilities. So I don't know about that part of the equation. That's a whole nother, we were talking, Dom and I were talking about, you know, things from the Marvel universe or whatever. That's Marvel universe stuff to me. So, you know, that's a whole nother thing. I can't even get into that. Gastric problems, do people have issues with GI? Yes. If you have an issue in your spinal cord, and the further higher up it is, the more issues that people tend to have with getting their bowels to function quickly enough to pass stool. So stool gets really slow moving. The slower the stool gets moving in the bowel, the more fluid that's taken out, because your bowel is still taking out fluid all the time. So keeping well hydrated as much as you can within a bladder management program and doing your bowel program is very important to keep things running. Yes, that is run by the autonomic nervous system, and that's why it slows down. So keeping your bowels going and doing your bowel program right now, or maybe one of these spinal stimulators might be the answer for you if you're interested in that. How important is wearing pressure stockings? Should they be worn every day? Yes, they should be worn every day until your physician or your healthcare provider tells you you do not need them anymore. And the reason for that is that circulation in the legs, when you don't have muscle movement, that affects the circulation in your legs. So providing that compression stocking on your legs helps that blood flow return to your heart, so you don't get dizzy when you sit up, and you're able to sit up longer so your feet don't swell because of the circulation in your feet. So it's very important to wear those when you need those. Over time, people's bodies adjust and accommodate. I can't say exactly when that will be. For some people, it's a short amount of time. For some people, it's a longer, like years amount of time until their body circulation adjusts. So they should be worn until otherwise instructed. So we have a lot of people that are looking for assistance. So please be sure and contact your legislative people to tell them that this is a crisis, because they're not going to know unless you tell them. There's a couple of questions about some urinary things. And one person has a family member who wears an external catheter every day, and at least 4 to 5 times a week it leaks or falls off. What tips are we missing? Well, that is a challenge, because sometimes if it's a high level individual that has some spontaneous bladder voiding, sometimes that comes out with so much force it's hard to do. So try some different products. You can talk to the catheter companies and they will send you out samples so that you can try some different products. And once you find a product that works, have your healthcare professional write a letter of medical necessity. They will know what to write to the insurance company to ask for coverage for that particular product that works. So some are made with the catheters that fit over the penis shaft are different. They're more solid. Sometimes the taping system can be different. Just be sure that you do not tape, that you constrict the penis. Don't tape it so tight, because there's still blood flow that goes through there. So don't, can end up to a lot of problems with that. But talk to the different catheter companies and have them send you a different variety to see which one works for them. So that is a huge issue. Some have a wider outlet flow, some have a smaller outlet flow. You probably need a wider outlet flow for that flood of urine that's coming out. And the other question was that there was a woman who was wanting to learn how to catheterize on the toilet, how to position so that she can learn to catheterize on the toilet. For females, catheterizing on the toilet is a challenge at first because you can't see from that direction. You can see where things are when you lay in bed and you put a mirror in front of your genitalia and you can look and you can see where you're supposed to catheterize. Okay, so when you're sitting on the toilet, you can't quite see that. So sometimes you can get a mirror and float it in the toilet water. Now I know, people say, oh, no, but it works. Take a gloved hand, take it out when you're finished catheterizing, but at least you can see where you're going. Now, sometimes people can learn to do the catheterization in bed where they can see where things is. Sometimes they will position their fingers so that maybe they've got the catheter in these 2 fingers, and maybe they place this finger in the vagina, and then they know how high or low where that catheter should go. Sometimes they will use these 2 fingers to hold the catheter and put this finger on the clitoris. And again, they can kind of know how high or low. And so you can feel that same thing. Now, it sounds almost impossible. How can I catheterize myself? I can't feel, I can't miss, or I'll get an infection because I can't be running the catheter around and touching things. And I can't see. So how will I do this? Well, think about typing. Okay, a lot of people type and they look at the keyboard, but most people can just type because they've memorized where their fingers should go on the keyboard. It's the same thing with catheterizing. You can memorize by holding the catheter in different ways. You can memorize where that catheter, if I'm holding the catheter here and I have my finger on one of my anatomical landmarks here, I know it should go like this. I know if my anatomical landmark is here and my fingers should maybe be this far apart. So learn that in bed while you can see what you're doing. And then when you're sitting up, you can use that same kind of thing. It'll take practice. It won't come overnight, but you'll get it. And so people do that. How do you get rid of quad gut? And I'll have to make this the last question because this is time. And we're kind of running out of time. Quad gut. So that is a problem of lax muscles. People say, oh, I've got the bloat. And how come I have the bloat? Well, it's because the muscles can't tense to hold in your abdominal the contents of your abdominal cavity. And when you eat food that causes bloating, and all food causes bloating, that's the way your bowel works, is that it creates gas as the food's digested that helps propel the stool along. So if you have muscular tone, you can hold in your abdomen, or your muscles will be taut enough to hold in. If your muscles are lax because you have paralysis, those muscles won't hold in what you have. So you can monitor yourself by avoiding foods that are high in roughage, but on the other hand, you need that to make your bowel work because it's slower. So maybe just, have a light meal if you're, going to be going out for like the evening, or, for a short amount of time, have a light meal so that you don't bloat out your gut so much. So know what bloats, like beans, roughage. Some people are lactose intolerant, and that will really bloat out the gut. So notice what that is. Move your legs to help move that gas along in the bowel. Roll from side to side. Do your wheelchair push-ups, because whenever you're moving your body, that's going to affect the muscles in your abdomen. So that will help expel some of that gas. There's also e-stim that you can do on your abdomen to create a six-pack. You can see it on TV. If you watch Dom, you'll see people who are exercising and they put their abdominal electrical stimulator. It has nothing to do with paralysis. It's just a way of tightening your abdominal muscles. So talk to your healthcare professional about that before you take any action. Be sure and talk to your healthcare professional. And with that, we're at the top of the hour. But again, there's so many questions about many people have written in about how are they going to get help? They need to have home modifications. They need transportation. They need somebody to help them come and do a few things. Talk to your legislative people. Talk to organizations in your community and ask for support. If there's anybody who can support you, you can hire people on your own. Where are you going to get the funding for that? That's another question. You can fundraise. Be careful if you start a GoFundMe page, because that can affect your Medicaid benefit. So there are different organizations that can help you fundraise, one of which is Help Hope Live. Now, they do charge a fee for their service, and a lot of people, well, no, I want all that money for myself. But what they do is that they will help you fundraise. They'll help you craft your story. They have marketing people that help you develop a story that will catch people's eyes. So they do a lot of work into preparing your fundraising opportunity. And then they can purchase, with the funds that are raised, they can purchase the equipment you need and gift it to you, so you are not affected so much in your Medicaid finances. So they're Talk to Help Hope Live. I'm probably not expressing that well because I'm trying to finish up here, but talk to them. There are other companies that help you fundraise. I know that particular company is very legitimate. So talk to different companies that can help you gain funds through different resources. That's another way. Sometimes, again, if you call that, those people that do the checking on things, the investigative reporters, sometimes if you invite them into your world and tell them about the situation that's going on, they can help make connections in the community. For instance, if you need a ramp to get into your house and they do a story about here, you can't get into your house, sometimes somebody in the community will volunteer to do that for you. So try to use all your resources. Talk to your civic organizations, talk to churches, even if you're not a member of that church. Sometimes members of that church, they don't care if you're a member or not, but they are happy to help. So try to use all the resources. Keep at it. Keep at it. You'll talk to a bunch of different people and they'll be like, gosh, I'm sorry. I really don't know what to tell you. But then every once in a while, you keep going, you're going to hit upon somebody who says, I'm really kind of interested in this, and I'm interested in you, and I want to help you. So keep going with that, because those people are out there, and we need to connect with those people that really want to help. So with that, I better stop talking now. So I thank you for coming today, and I'll look forward to seeing you next month on the Ask Nurse Linda webinar. Thank you.